dwellings. We are working on the series called The Ties That Bind. This is the third in that series, Common Causes, Mutual Enemies. Earlier, we had discussed how the human species is actually almost two species. That on the small scale, we are a relatively different kind of animal than we are on the large scale. In the same way that grasshoppers are relatively different than locusts. Depending on the density of the population, little green harmless grasshoppers become coarsened, large, carnivorous, devouring plagues. Human beings, in a certain sense, follow that paradigm. There are a number of species which do. So on the small scale, our relationships are familial. They are personal and interpersonal. And a whole different ethic obtains when we are constantly dealing with people whose names we know and whose histories we share. But when we become anonymous or relatively anonymous on the larger scale, a whole different kind of personality emerges. It's normal for literary agents or for social scientists, political scientists, to glamorize the small scale, the noble savage, the country mouse, and to villainize the large scale, the urban jungle. There's a lot of reasons to do that. I already did it myself when I said I compared the grasshopper to the locust. So we like to show the smaller scale as being more naive, more innocent. It's easy to move in the direction of thinking that the small scale is Eden and the large scale is the fall. There's a value to that, but only so far. The truth is, even on the small scale, there are a lot of problems that beset human relationships. The only difference, I think, from the point of view of building a healthy lifestyle or a healthy mentality or philosophy of life, is that when we live too much on the large scale and we have no great reference to small scale relationships, there is something about the problems that we suffer there that are unsolvable, that are irresolvable. When we live exclusively on the relatively anonymous level of wheeling and dealing, and everything is to take advantage of the other, and everything is to exploit every situation and every relationship, when we do that, beyond a certain point, we are probably irrecoverable in our humanity. On the small scale, there are lots of problems with selfishness, lots of problems with human weakness and fault. But most of those problems are subject to some level of address and prevention. So, I want to consider the troubles on the small scale primarily in this session. Divorce, abandonment, custody battles, infanticide, fratricide, inheritance fights, the kinds of problems that occur on the family level of life are disastrous to our characters, our personalities, and are causative of our collapse. Every relationship on the familial level, every essential human bond is subject to significant disaster. The spousal bond, infidelities of every kind. The parental bond and the filial bond, that is the bond of the child to the parent or the parent to the child, is subject to every kind of disaster. The fraternal bond, the bond of brothers and sisters, subject to every kind of trouble. I mentioned earlier, and it's worth mentioning from time to time, that while brothers and brothers are prone to fight, and while sisters and sisters are prone to fight, the least affected of all the bonds by the failures of human character, by selfishness, is the brother-sister bond. That one tends to endure longer in every society and more stably. There are notable exceptions, of course, but the brother-sister bond is probably the safest one for the longer term across the world. And in some societies, it is not the bond of husband and wife which is the foundation of society, which is the foundation of the family. It is the bond of brother and sister, which is the bond of the family. That is to say, a woman bears children from this or that husband figure, but her brother and she raised the child. That happens in a minority of human societies, but it does happen, and it succeeds as well as many other forms of family structure. So the brother-sister bond, again, it has its troubles, but it tends to survive them more often than any other bond. At any rate, the failures of the small scale are truly disastrous, life-threatening, and they strip us of the ultimate meaning that we need to live a human life. I want to discuss why that happens and how that happens. There's a pattern which obtains there, which is worthy of our reflection. And I would like to use the word mimetic to describe the pattern of relationships on the smallest scale. Mimetic is related to the word imitative. That is to say, on the small scale, and on every scale of society for that matter, we are terribly observant of what the other one is doing all the time, and especially what the other one is getting all the time, what the other one has, what the other one enjoys. The closer that one is to us, the more important it is for us to observe what are the advantages, the blessings, the opportunities, the enjoyments, the pleasures that that one is obtaining. And then, in the observation of it, an immediate reflex of whether or not I have it, and an immediate awareness that if I don't have it, it feels like I have been deprived. It feels immediately as though that one's pleasure has somehow impoverished me, has taken something from me. There is a sense of indignation, a sense of righteous anger, a sense of theft. And so someone else having what I have not, especially on that smaller scale, creates a tremendous restlessness. And the trouble with that restlessness is that it's pretty much unexamined. It's accepted at face value. Someone has taken something from me. Perhaps you have the same experience on the road as I do, as many do. You're tooling along at the speed limit in the right lane, and someone is going a little bit faster than you are on the left lane, and they pass you by. What could be more normal? Why should I be the fastest person on the highway? And yet, inevitably, if someone passes me in the left lane, I don't think to myself, it's not a thought, that's the trouble. I feel that somehow I have been disgraced, that somehow this person has humiliated me. This person has done this on purpose to show me who's the fastest and who's the best. And quite unconsciously, without thought, I press my foot to the metal a little bit further, and I speed up. Now, I had to drive for decades before I was even making myself aware that this is what I was doing. I have to laugh at myself, like, why should I be necessarily the fastest person on the highway? And if I were, shouldn't I be arrested? And if I can think that through straightforwardly, as I have just spoken it, why did I allow myself to drive for decades under the influence, as it were, of what? Testosterone or some other drug that is in my blood. It's not just testosterone. This is not just the toxic male kind of head bashing I'm doing here. This is human nature. We are mimetic. We are imitative. We watch what the other one has. Especially that is true in the earliest years of our formation in the family. So my fond recollection of the occasional popsicle which brothers and sisters were given in my family growing up. Broke the popsicle in half because there was one stick for either side. You had your little grape popsicle, and your brother had his grape half. And then the two sisters next to me got the cherry popsicle, and they broke it in half, and they had two cherry popsicles. And as soon as my one sister began to lick her popsicle, at that moment, I realized somehow, immediately, that I wanted that flavor, and not the damn flavor I had been given. It is as though my sister took away my pleasure. And of course, I wanted her popsicle instead of mine. And I said to her, "Give it to me." She said, "No, I want it." So I grabbed her popsicle and gave her mine. She cries, my father and mother come in, "What's going on?" And I said, "She deprived me of the popsicle that was righteously mine." I didn't say righteous then, but that was my clear feeling. I emphasize it. It's a feeling. It's an affect. It's not a thought. It doesn't bear thinking. As soon as you think it, it becomes ridiculous. But The greatest single trouble with human nature is it doesn't think it. It simply emotes and does. And then when you ask someone the wrong question, you ask them, for what reason are you behaving this way or that? You obviously will get the wrong answer because the question involves a reason. And there is no reason. There are many things we do for which we should not ask why. Why implies a reason. And many things we do on this level especially are not reasonable. So the question why takes us in the wrong direction. We end up rationalizing all sorts of reasons. Most of what we do when it comes to explaining our behavior is rationalization. Why is not the right question. The question is, what motivated us? We should say to the brothers and sisters who are squabbling, one teasing the other, one taking something from the other, you know how it is if you have brothers and sisters and someone brings a gift to the one and not to the other, or a gift of a different nature to the one and not to the other. The roof falls in. Don't ask the child why. The child doesn't know why. Think to yourself, what motivates that child? It is mimetic envy, covetousness. It is built into the grain. And so if there's something wrong with human nature, that's it. The inability to think this out, but the impulse to feel it without reflection. And the impulse to feel it and to act on that feeling immediately. That unexamined life, that unexamined impulse, lies at the foundation of most of the disastrous relationships we have on every scale. But it begins on the small scale. That's why I would never use the word noble to describe that small-scale society, the noble savage so-called. This problem is ubiquitous across the whole swath of our humanity, from the largest to the smallest scale. That capacity to observe what the other is doing all the time, of course, is very useful in one other respect, however. It's part of our education. How does a child learn to speak from the age of 9 months or 10 months to the age of 5 or 6 years? Think of that. Almost no child anywhere is given classes in how to learn his first language. There are no tutors, there are no textbooks, there are no classes, there's no exam, there's no penalty for getting it wrong, and there's no reward for getting it right. And yet, haphazardly, thematically, without paying much attention, bumbling along, the child learns the entire repertoire of a fully constituted human language in very few years, and by the time the child is in grade school, can speak that language, practically speaking, without flaw. Computer specialists pumping all the information of grammars and lexicons and rule books into a computer would take decades to make that computer as effectively communicative of a language as a child at the age of 6. How does the child do it? Well, clearly our mind, our brain is designed for it, but emotionally the child is imitative of everything that's happening around. Not only does the child form sounds exactly like the sound he or she is hearing all around him growing up, but the imitative process of the human mind is such that somehow or other the child is able to almost infallibly understand the mental activity of the person who's making those sounds. And by looking at that person's face, by judging their frame, every movement of their musculature, the child is able to reproduce in his mind something quite analogous to what is happening in the mind of the other one. This happens before we are 1 year old. You can take a newborn infant, 1 hour old. When the child opens his eyes, you can look at that baby and hold its stare. It will look you in the eye, 1 hour. Now, think about that. The child doesn't know what an eye is, has never seen an eye before, has never seen a face before, doesn't know what a face is. This has never been taught such a thing. And yet, Even if you have lots of beautiful colors all around you, butterflies on the walls, the child will think your face more interesting. And in your face, nothing more interesting than your eyes. And will look you right there. And then, to be sure that you are making this connection, open your mouth as wide as you can and hold it for 30 seconds or so. The child will watch you, and then open up its mouth the same way. The child doesn't know what a mouth is, doesn't know that it has a mouth, doesn't know that your mouth corresponds with his mouth. And yet, the child is engaged in a thought-by-thought congruence with you. The child somehow knows you are like it, and it is like you, and can do what you do, feel what you feel, act like you act. How does a child learn to speak? This mimetic behavior, imitative behavior. It's essential to our humanity. It's how we pass on the whole repertoire of our culture from one generation to the next. Even though we are poor teachers, we are not very good, we are not well equipped to give classes on it, yet the child picks it up. And you can be sure that whatever the child is picking up, it picked it up from us. No matter how much we like to blame some other influence. Up to a certain age, whatever the child has done, we had taught it somehow. The child is mimetic, imitative. And that imitative impulse, which the child cannot think through, it's not reasoned out, it's not reasonable, it's felt. That's what makes the child so envious of everything another child has. And the same thing happens in us as adults. We are envious of what every other adult has. Sometimes we're envious of what children, we want to be children again. We want to have it all. I remember as a child wanting to have what my parents had and my grandparents. And now that I'm nearer to my grandparents, I want to be the child who doesn't have any of those problems. We are impulsively given to watch what the other one takes, to grasp it ourselves. And if we cannot grasp it, to feel that we have been deprived. All the troubles between the sexes, all the troubles between the economic classes, all the troubles between the age grades of our society, and all the troubles between everybody in our family and you and me are related to this in some way. If we could get behind it and make it talk, make it reasonable, there would be much less road rage, much less speeding on the highway, much less divorce. So many things in life would work out. But our capacity to get behind this is limited. Perhaps it wasn't explained properly. But if we're interested in making a second chance of our experience in life, if we're interested in picking up the theme again of a better humanity for ourselves in the future, this might be the thing to do, to get behind the impulse and to think it through. That's what maturation was always about, to postpone the gratification a minute and then an hour. And then some gratification was postponed until you got married, right? There were some things we thought will wait because it will be better when we were prepared, when we had a character mature enough to sustain the opportunity and the blessing. But if we don't have that character and we grasp too early for every possible pleasure, the pleasure will be our undoing and somebody else's around us. To this end, I would like to visit a story from the smallest scale. From the 4th chapter of Genesis, it's the well-known text about Cain and Abel. And in this text, we will see the mimetic motive. We will see the covetousness and the envy, and the inability of one brother to get behind his impulse and to think it through and to postpone his gratification and all the disasters to which that led. Genesis 4, verse 1. The man, Adam, had relations with his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have produced a man with the help of the Lord. The word Cain in Hebrew, means produce or even reproduce. Even in the English language, production and reproduction are closely interrelated terms. Cain's name appears in the New Testament in the Gospel of St. John. There's a wedding feast at Cana, same word. And it's a wedding feast, so it's exactly that relationship which is implicated in reproduction. So it has this regular thematic relationship to production and reproduction. So she names the boy for the production that she was able to marshal. But then that child will become a farmer, as you will see in a moment, and that is, Cain is interested in production. And in reproduction, that is, reproducing the grain from harvest to harvest. That is his work. Next, she bore his brother Abel. Abel became a keeper of flocks, and Cain a tiller of the soil. We hear this proclaimed, or we read it in the text, two job descriptions. We could say, well, this is the imputed ancestors of all farmers, or the imputed ancestors of all shepherds. Okay, it's a kind of a foundation story of future societies. But it's also a foundation story of future conflicts. We know from American history, the shepherd, or we would call them the cowboy, following the herds, were the arch enemies of the farmers. You see, the farmers had fences across the prairie. They grew their crops. They tilled their soil. They didn't like it when the cowboys came by with thousands of steers who pushed over the fences and ate everything in their fields and then continued on their way, destroying the whole irrigation and so on. There were wars in the American West between farmers and shepherds. Setup. It's a setup from the beginning. Cain and Abel were bound to become enemies to each other. In the course of time, Cain brought an offering to the Lord God from the fruit of the soil, while Abel, for his part, brought one of the best firstlings of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not. It almost appears arbitrary here. They both bring sacrifices to God, Cain from the harvest and Abel from the firstlings of his flock, and yet God seems to be only pleased with one of these two offerings. It seems capricious on God's part. And so when texts like the Bible give us a very truncated story, we are supposed to pause and consider the most likely explanation. And here you go. Cain is a farmer. Farmers produce. That is to say, they invest a lot of work. They have to, from sun till sun, right? They're up in the morning early, and they're working till the sun sets, and they are in charge. They're the managers of their crop. It was introduced already a little earlier in Genesis that Adam would have to sweat to produce something from the soil. Even though it would produce thorn and thistle, he would have to work to get it. And so we have these people who work a great deal with a lot of frustration to get the fruit of the soil from which they work. And farmers are notorious for being hard at it all day long. And in small-scale societies, as in large, 8, 10, 12 hours a day labor during the growing months is not unusual. They have a sense of control over the soil, over the environment. They have to have a certain sense of ownership, possession, management. We use the word husbandry to mean taking control over the land, over the animals in the fences, and over the produce, over the production. Husbandry. And that's what Cain is doing. Contrast that to the shepherd. He follows his flocks or his herds. Wherever they go, he follows after them. They eat what God grows on the ground. They drink what God flows into the river. They have their life, as it were, freely given, and the shepherd observes it, and from time to time he collects what he needs to survive from them. The wool and the meat and the milk and so on. This is given as a gift. So his whole attitude is one of greater gratitude and less management and control. That's well-known distinction between shepherds and farmers, and if we lived closer to that level of subsistence, we would know it better ourselves. this mentality is probably part of why the offering of Cain was less respected by God. In fact, if you examine the text closely, you see it. Abel for his part brought one of the best firstlings of his flock. The best firstlings. That is the thing, The best one is the one you want to eat yourself. The firstling especially you want to eat yourself. He gave that thing which was his greatest appetite and greatest pleasure, he gave away. It didn't matter so much to him to have the greatest pleasure as it meant to give away the best gift. The relationship, the covenant, if you will, was more important to him than the realization of his appetite. Cain brought an offering, not his best, not his first, not the first fruits. There's something so called in ancient agriculture, not his first fruits and not his best fruits. Nope, just an offering. After all, he could say to himself quite rationally, God doesn't eat food anyways. What difference does it make? If I just need something to hold the place of a sacrifice. According to the prayer book of my religion, we have to have these gifts. We put them on the altars. And I've done that. Since God isn't eating anything anyways, what difference does it make to him? I will just do that. Except if it doesn't cost Cain much. If he doesn't deprive himself much. If he's more concerned about the realization of his goals, the realization of his appetites, the realization of his pleasures, then the priority he is giving to that relationship outside himself is diminished. And that's why the text would suggest that God, who is the measurer of authenticity, the one who guarantees the truth, is not pleased with him. This would be true in any relationship. Whether you're married or in a family of any setting, or in a small work environment, your boss will eventually know whether you're giving the work the priority of an honest worker. Your spouse will know whether you're giving the marriage the priority of an honest spouse. Your children will eventually know whether you're giving them the priority of being honest parents. People know. They measure these things. They watch. They're mimetic. They're observant. Children are always comparing what other parents are giving, for instance, to their children as compared to what you are giving to them. It's amazing the comparisons that children are always making. That's how they learn so much so fast. And that's why they're so dangerous to our reputations. So, God looks on the one better than the other. And it says here, Cain greatly resented this and was crestfallen. His face fell. It was obvious in his face. He was furious and confused. So the Lord said to Cain, and here's much to the point here, why are you so resentful and crestfallen? If you do well, you can hold up your head. But if not, sin is a demon lurking at the door. His urge is toward you, yet you can be his master. It doesn't say there's a devil lurking at your sin is a devil, as a demon. That is something corrosive, something eating away at you. And it's right there at your door. You're not looking out the window at a distance, figuring it out what it is. You're not getting the specifications by some kind of letter or telephone call about a visitor who's coming. You don't have a manual inside your library to explain to you what's going on. It's at the door. It's right at you. This impulse to compare. And that's what he's doing. Cain is looking at the favor that Abel has. And he's comparing it to the disfavor he sustains. And he is furious, sad, crestfallen, and resentful. That is to say, there's the jealousy there. There's the envy. He is resentful. The advice he is given is a good one, right? Why are you this way? Probably maybe we would better write, what motivates you this way? This demon, this impulse, which is so useful for learning language and for growing up and understanding the world around you, so useful for making useful comparisons about how the world works, how people work, is also a disaster to you unless you get control of it. And it says you can do that. You can actually get a hold of this. You don't have to be mastered by it. You can be its master. That's the good news on the small scale. I don't know that we can be the master of all of these dynamics on the large one unless we can do it here, unless it works in a family way, unless it works in a marital way, unless it works domestically, unless it works in a small scale community. It won't work. You will never be able to get large scale societies to do these things. Character must be built here on the smallest level. That's why whenever you meet someone who's a utopian political philosopher and is urging on your society this new vision of total justice and how we have to get rid of everything from the past and implement this new program which will guarantee that there will be well-being and happiness for all, etc. Look out. There's a jackboot somewhere coming at you. There is something awful about to be done. No large-scale human movements can ever reproduce the virtues or the vices that are learned and unlearned at home. This is the only place where these things can be addressed. And it is addressed here. His urge is towards you, yet you can be his master. Cain said to his brother, Abel, "Let us go out into the field." This is premeditated. When they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord asked Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" Reminds us of earlier, right? God said to Adam, where are you? Now he's saying, where is your brother? Very mimetic. He answered, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" The absolute answer is, of course you are. That's exactly what mimesis, that's what that imitative impulse does. We're always keeping stock of everyone all the time. To pretend otherwise, as if we were indifferent to the welfare of our brother, our sister, our spouse, our child, that's madness. Of course we are the keepers of others. That's all we do all day long. That's what we do most of the night, dreaming. We are keeping other people before our eyes. And yet he asks that question in a kind of denial. This is therefore a denial of his own humanity, just as much as it was a denial of his brother's humanity to have killed him. The Lord said to him, "What you have done, listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the soil." I know a priest who involved in the excavation of mass graves in Central Europe in the last decade. He works at Georgetown University now. He has excavated 800,000 graves from the end of the Second World War, which had not been counted before in the Holocaust. He estimates there's 800,000 more. 1.5 million or more murdered Jews, not in concentration camps, but one bullet per person in the fields and forests from the Ukraine to Lithuania, Poland, down to Romania, Bulgaria, Serbia, across Central Europe. They were rounded up from villages, by villagers, by their brothers and their sisters, well, or not, by their neighbors, and taken out and executed in the last days of the war. And the reason why this priest is excavating, well, because of course it is right to do so, but he said it was this text, "Your brother's blood cries out from the soil." Those graves were hidden. But blood is blood. That is to say, a human life must be the ultimate measure, the ultimate arbiter of what is valuable in this world. If that doesn't cry out, then our humanity is lost. So the willingness to measure it is a determination, even a grim determination, to keep track of our humanity, to be keepers of our humanity rather than losers. Because if we are not our brother's keeper, we are the losers for it. Therefore, the Lord says to him, "You shall be banned from the soil that opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. If you till the soil, it will no longer give you produce. You shall become a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is too great to bear. Since you have now banished me from the soil, I must avoid your presence and become a restless wanderer. Anyone might kill me on sight." "Not so," the Lord said. "If anyone kills Cain, Cain shall be avenged sevenfold." So the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest anyone should kill him at sight. So Cain is tattooed somehow. We don't know how. There's a mark which he is given, that he shall not have to suffer the full consequence of his folly. It's probably very good moral advice. Nobody should have to suffer the full consequence of their folly, especially the folly of their relative youth. But this mechanism of constant comparison should lead to careful keeping of those we watch, rather than the careless disregard of their humanity, or the false upgrading of our humanity to a near divine status whereby we can deprive people of their rights and even of their lives. This is the mechanism on the small scale which wrecks itself into holocausts on the large scale, and every other kind of disastrous foreign policy decisions that large governments are always making. But it's no good for us to wax eloquent against large-scale governments, whether they be fascists or socialists or communists, from gulags or concentration camps. It happens at home first, where someone has something that we don't have, and we start to say to ourselves, good, I hope my sister enjoys that popsicle that I don't have. If we could do that, it would be a whole new species of humanity that in one generation would rise up, just to raise our children very well. That's the best utopian thing we can do. And in the meantime, play catch up, since we probably can't master our humanity so well as children can, properly raised. We should at least try to follow after the good example ourselves and give it the best example we can where we are living now.